The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and coming rain, a familiar comfort for old Silas. He'd lived his 70-odd years, breathing it, working it, praying over it. But this time, the damp earth wasn't just a smell. It was the foundation shaking beneath his worn boots. Then came the thump. Not thunder, not an old tractor backfiring. This was a calculated, precise impact, something impossibly heavy landing right on his freshly tilled potato field. Silas squinted, his eyes, though rheumy with age, still sharp enough to catch the glint of alien metal through the gathering gloom. They were here. Just like the broadcasts had warned. But Silas wasn't much for broadcasts. He was much more for his potatoes. A segmented metallic limb, silent and unnerving, extended from the gleaming vessel. It moved with an inhuman grace, its three-fingered manipulator sampling the soil, analyzing, calculating. Silas felt a flicker of annoyance. His soil. His good soil. He watched from the cover of the old oak, his gnarled hands gripping the smooth, worn wood of his favorite digging spade. The blade, sharpened over decades, reflected the alien ship's harsh searchlights. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was a farmer. And right now his field was being invaded by something that looked like it had meticulously planned every nanometer of its trajectory. Two more limbs unfurled, delicate sensors sweeping across the rows of new growth. They were looking for time something, processing data, probably running probability models on every blade of grass. Silas knew what they weren't factoring in, the stubborn heart of a man who'd seen 3 generations through drought, blight, and economic downturn. A man who knew the land like it was part of his own skin. One of the alien drones, a smaller scout unit, detached and hovered towards the old barn. Silas's heart hammered. Not the barn. That was where the tools were, where the seeds were stored for next year. That was the soul of his operation. "You want my potatoes? You gotta earn 'em," Silas muttered, the words a low growl in his throat. He took a deep breath, the damp earth filling his lungs, smelling of life, of struggle, of home. Then he moved. Not with military precision, not with studied tactics. He moved like a shadow familiar with every dip and rise of his own field. He moved with the instinct of a badger defending its set, of a hawk protecting its nest. He didn't have a plan. He had an impulse. His spade, a simple tool, became an extension of his will. With a grunt, he dug into the soft earth. Not at the alien ship, but directly in front of the scouting drone's path. Not a weapon, not an attack. Just a rapid, deliberate trench, precisely where the spring runoff would be channeled. The alien drone paused, its sensors clearly struggling to compute this seemingly random, illogical action. As the first drops of rain began to fall, turning the damp earth into rich, clinging mud, Silas didn't pray for a miracle. He just kept digging. The rain, which had started as a gentle patter, now hammered down, drumming a furious rhythm on the alien ship's hull and soaking Silas to the bone. Mud splattered across his face with every furious scoop of his spade, tasting of grit and the raw earth he was fighting for. He wasn't digging Sodom. He was digging around them, a moat of sorts for an old man's castle made of potatoes. The scout drone, that gleaming metallic sphere, paused mid-air. Its optical sensors, which had been systematically cataloging soil composition and atmospheric particulates, flickered. It turned its primary lens toward Silas, then back to the rapidly deepening channel he was carving. The water, channeled by the sudden downpour, was already beginning to collect, rushing towards the lowest point, precisely where Silas intended it to go. A metallic voice, synthesized and flat, crackled from the main ship's hull, echoing across the sodden field. Query. Human units' actions are non-hostile by threat assessment parameters. Data indicates environmental modification, but for what purpose? Silas didn't understand the words, but he understood the confusion. He grinned, a wide, mud-streaked flash of teeth. "Purpose is you ain't gettin' past here without sinkin', boy," he mumbled, pushing a fresh mound of rich, dark earth into place. He'd built these trenches for runoff every season of his adult life, adapting to the fickle temper of the sky. This wasn't planning, this was knowing how water flows, knowing how mud grips, knowing how things get stuck. The drone, still hovering, began a new scan, its energy readings spiking as it tried to recalibrate. It extended a delicate, three-fingered manipulator, lowering it towards the churning mud. Its precise instruments were built for hard surfaces, for sterile environments, for predictable resistance. This viscous, clinging goo was outside its parameters. As the manipulator touched the muck, it immediately began to sink. Not rapidly, not dramatically, but slowly, inexorably. The alien technology, designed for efficiency and optimal trajectory, was useless against the simple, ancient reality of a well-soaked field. The drone pulled back, a faint whirring sound of gears straining, its sophisticated AI likely screaming about unforeseen variables. From the main ship, a larger ramp deployed, a squad of taller, more menacing alien figures emerging into the downpour. Their sleek black armor seemed to absorb the light, their multi-jointed legs designed for rapid, sure-footed movement. But even they hesitated at the edge of the deepening trench, their probability models undoubtedly failing to account for the depth, the slipperiness, the sheer stickiness of Silas's carefully crafted bog. Silas, breathing heavily, leaned on his spade. He tasted the rain, cold and clean, washing away some of the mud. He tasted the satisfaction of knowing his land, of making do with what he had. He didn't have plasma rifles or advanced simulations. He had dirt, water, and 70 years of knowing how to make enough out of very little. And right now, that was proving to be more than enough to baffle an invading fleet. He wasn't going to defeat them with a blast, but with a slow, grinding halt, powered by pure, unadulterated human stubbornness. He looked at the hesitant aliens, then at his churning, muddy trench. "Still think this is just a field, huh?" he wheezed, a tired but triumphant chuckle rumbling in his chest. The taste of scarcity wasn't defeat. For humans, it was often the precise ingredient for ingenuity. The air reeked of it, metallic, visceral, the unmistakable scent of fresh blood mingling with ozone and the acrid tang of burnt circuitry. Dr. Eris Thorne knelt on the cold, unforgiving deck plating, his hands slick with the crimson reality of Sergeant Jian Li's wound. The ship's medical bay was a wreck, most of the automated diagnostics fritzed, the emergency cauterizers offline. All he had was a medkit, scavenged from a supply closet, a flickering emergency lamp, and the desperate fading pulse beneath his fingers. John's face was ashen, sweat mingling with dirt on his forehead. An alien slug, a nasty piece of kinetic energy, had torn through his side, perforating something vital. The monitors, which Eris had jury-rigged with salvaged comms tech, showed a rapidly plummeting pressure. Every sterile, calculated protocol Eris had ever learned screamed for equipment he didn't have. He could feel the alien ship humming around them, a low, constant vibration that spoke of silent observation. Their meticulous, probabilistic sensors were undoubtedly logging every desperate, flailing movement, every failing vital sign. They probably had a probability model for this exact scenario, predicting John's expiration down to the microsecond. "Pressure's dropping, Doc," Gian gasped, his voice a ragged whisper. "Just let me go." "Not on my watch, Sergeant," Eris growled back, his own voice tight with a fierce, primal resolve. His eyes scanned the damaged wall panels, the exposed conduits sparking erratically. There was a section of damaged power cabling, thick and insulated, a faint hum still emanating from it. Dangerous. Unconventional. Potentially lethal. He pulled a multi-tool from his belt, its metallic gleam reflecting the frantic light. No time for sterilization, no time for debate. This was pure instinct, a gamble born of desperation. He stripped a section of the cable, exposing the copper wires within, then carefully, agonizingly, delicately, tapped it to a live power source he'd bypassed earlier. A crackle, a shower of blue sparks, and a low, angry hum. The wire glowed cherry red. Jian's eyes widened, fear momentarily eclipsing the pain. "What? What are you doing?" "Making a cautery," Eris said, his voice flat, his focus absolute. He could feel the searing heat radiating from the impromptu tool, the smell of singed plastic already filling the air. This was going to hurt. A lot. And it might kill Jian faster than the wound itself. But without it, Jian was already dead. He looked at the dying man, then at the glowing wire. The alien observers, wherever they were surely processing this data point with utter confusion. A human, improvising a medical instrument from a ship's power conduit. No known protocol, no simulation, would ever account for such raw, uncalculated audacity. With a deep breath that tasted of blood and fear, Eris pressed the crude, glowing wire to Jian's open wound. A hiss, a sickening smell of burning flesh, and Jean's body convulsed, a guttural scream tearing from his throat, quickly cut short as Eris clamped a hand over his mouth. The metallic tang of blood intensified, now mixed with the horror of scorched tissue. Eris worked fast, guided by a furious intuition, sealing the breached vessel, praying to a god he hadn't thought about in years that this mad gamble would hold. He didn't know if it would work. He didn't know if John would survive the improvised brutality. But in that moment, under the cold, unblinking gaze of an alien invasion, Eris Thorne was a healer who refused to be bound by reason, by limits, or by the calculated certainty of death. He was simply human, armed with a spark of defiance and the absolute refusal to quit. John's screams had faded into a ragged groan, but his body now convulsed with a new, terrifying rhythm. The skin was clammy, despite the burning heat radiating from him. Infection, a silent, insidious killer, was already setting in. Eris wiped sweat from his own brow, his hands still trembling slightly from the raw brutality of what he'd just done. The metallic scent of blood was now overlain with the sharp, sickening tang of feverish sweat and a faint, electrical burning from the barely sealed wound. "Pressure's stable," Eris mumbled to himself, peering at the jury-rigged monitor. A whisper of triumph, quickly choked by the cold dread of what was to come. He'd stopped the bleed, yes, but he was in a wrecked alien ship, with no sterile environment, no antibiotics, and a patient whose system was already screaming in distress. John thrashed, his eyes fluttering open, unfocused and wide with delirium. "The light, so bright," he slurred, pushing feebly at an imaginary weight on his chest. He was drifting into a fever dream, and Eris knew it meant the bacteria were winning. The ship hummed around them, a deep, pervasive thrum that felt like a predator's purr. Eris could almost feel the alien sensors piercing through the walls, recording every irregular heartbeat, every desperate twitch. They were calculating his probability of success, and Eris knew it was a number so infinitesimally small it bordered on zero. But zero wasn't in his vocabulary. He scanned the ruined medical bay, his gaze desperate. Most of the sterile supply cabinets were blasted open, their contents scattered or melted. What was left? A few emergency nutrient packs, some basic bandages, and a decontamination spray bottle. Industrial grade. Not for internal use. Probably toxic. But it had antiseptic properties, however harsh. His eyes darted to a container of what looked like alien energy drink powder, spilled from a shattered crew station. It smelled faintly sweet, sickly artificial. Not food, not medicine. But a thought sparked. A wild, unhinged thought, born of desperation and the sheer refusal to yield. He grabbed a discarded medical beaker, miraculously intact, and a small, cracked data pad. He squinted at the ingredient list on the decontamination spray, then at the alien powder. No direct correlation, no known interactions. Completely unknown. This wasn't science. This was a Hail Mary pass in the dark. "Just hold on, Jan," Eris whispered, his voice hoarse. He mixed a tiny drop of the harsh disinfectant into a slurry with the alien powder, and a few drops of reclaimed potable water, stirring it with the blunt end of a broken sensor wand. It turned a sickly green, smelling vaguely of chemicals and artificial berries. A potion of pure, unadulterated hope and a prayer. It would either kill him instantly or buy them a few precious hours. He knelt beside Jimin again, gently lifting his head. "Drink this. All of it." Jen's eyes rolled, his mouth slack. Eris had to force it, tilting the beaker, letting the acrid liquid trickle past Jan's lips. The sergeant coughed, sputtered, but swallowed. Eris watched, heart-pounding for a reaction. Any reaction. He tasted the residue on his own fingers. Bitter, sweet, and faintly metallic. A chemical cocktail that defied every medical textbook. Hours later, the fever hadn't broken completely, but it had receded, pulling Jian back from the brink of delirium. He still thrashed, but the whispers had quieted. Aris, slumped against a console, exhaustion clawing at him, finally allowed himself a shaky breath. He'd gone against every rule, every protocol, every calculated probability. He hadn't planned. He'd just done. And sometimes, for humanity, that was the only plan that ever truly mattered. The salt-stung wind ripped at Captain Eva Rostova's hair, tearing at the tattered remains of her survival suit. Her small escape pod, a mere sliver of human tech, bobbed precariously on the churning, alien ocean. Above, the twin suns of Xylos Prime cast a sickly purple light across endless roaring waves. Every nerve ending screamed cold, exhaustion, and the bitter taste of imminent failure. Her comms were dead, her navigation busted. Just static in the mocking silence of space, punctuated by the shriek of the wind. She knew the aliens were out there. Their massive fleet, silent and deadly, orbited above. They'd seen her ship go down, tracked her pod splashdown with chilling precision. They were probably running simulations right now, charting her dwindling oxygen, calculating her chances of survival, predicting her futile attempts to reach the distant rocky islets barely visible on the horizon. They expected logic. They expected a plan. But Eva? Eva had nothing but a gut feeling, and a mind that refused to be neatly charted. She gripped the manual rudder, her knuckles white. The cold seeped into her bones, but a fire burned in her chest. A fierce, stubborn blaze. She pulled out a crumpled, water-stained star map she'd doodled herself. Months ago, during a particularly boring hyperspace jump. It wasn't official. It wasn't precise. It was just an impression of the Xylos Prime system, sketched from memory, a scatter of stars and vague planetary outlines. She traced a finger across a barely perceptible swirl on her map, a faint pencil mark indicating an eddy current she'd felt during her initial atmospheric descent, a momentary dip in the wind patterns, a subtle shift in the gravitational pull. It was less a scientific observation and more a memory, a flicker of intuition. The aliens, with their detailed scans, would have dismissed it as atmospheric noise, but Eva had been thither. She had felt it. The nearest landmass, a jagged spire of black rock, was directly to her right, a seemingly obvious destination. The smart, logical move. The one their probability models would surely predict. But something about that landmass felt wrong. Too easy. Too visible. She closed her eyes, letting the salt spray prickle her face, tasting the raw wildness of the alien sea. She could feel the rhythm of the waves, the deeper pull of the currents beneath the surface. It was a language she didn't consciously understand, but her body did. Her body, conditioned by years of rough landings and impossible survival scenarios, hummed with a different kind of data. With a grunt, she swung the rudder hard to the left, away from the obvious land, away from rescue, pushing against the main current. The escape pod groaned, threatening to capsize. This wasn't a plotted course. This was a hunch, a primal whisper in the chaos, a map drawn not on paper, but in the deeper, uncharted currents of her own mind. A voice crackled from a salvaged, barely functional alien comm unit, a sterile, synthesized tone. Analysis indicates deviation from optimal survival vector. Probability of successful landfall, 0.001%. Human subjects' actions are non-logical. Eva just grinned, a fierce, defiant flash of teeth against the raging wind. "That's what you think, Shiny?" She yelled back at the unfeeling void, her voice hoarse but strong. "You don't know my map." She pushed harder on the rudder, leaning into the next swell, letting the salt-stung wind sting her eyes but not break her spirit. For humans, sometimes the only map that mattered was the one etched into their own stubborn will. The escape pod scraped against abrasive rock, shuddering to a halt in a secluded cove. Eva coughed, her lungs burning with the effort of breathing the thick, alien air. The landing was rough, her body aching, but the solid ground beneath her boots felt like salvation after the tumultuous ocean. Above, the purple suns shimmered, casting long, distorted shadows across the unfamiliar flora clinging to the cliff face. Every muscle screamed for rest, but the persistent whir of alien drone activity, picked up faintly by her jury-rigged comm, reminded her that rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. The wind here was calmer, carrying not just salt spray but also something else, an echo. Distorted, metallic voices crackling through the air. Their tongues. She couldn't make out distinct words, but the tone was unmistakable. Analytical, procedural, they were discussing her, calculating her next move. She scrambled out of the pod, her mind racing despite the exhaustion. This hidden cove was a gift, a brief respite her, illogical, course had provided. But it wouldn't last. She needed a plan. Or, more accurately, she needed to asterisk wing it. A scout drone, smaller and faster than the previous one, zipped around the cliff face, its optical sensors immediately locking onto her, its multi-jointed manipulator extended. A data collection array focusing on her tattered suit, her sweat-streaked face. It was cataloging her, running simulations, predicting her surrender or desperate, futile resistance. Then, from further up the cliff, a squad of the larger armored aliens descended, their movements precise, synchronized. Their weapons, sleek and silent, were already trained on her. Her probability of escape, by their calculations, was 0. Ava straightened up, a defiant tremor running through her. She didn't have a weapon, but she had something else. A small, intricately carved metallic figurine she'd found in the debris of her escape pod, a good luck charm from a long-lost culture. It was utterly useless, but it looked important. It was weighty, gleamed with an inner light, and she knew it would confuse their sensors. She held it up, not as a weapon, but as an offering. Or a threat, she didn't know yet. The alien drone paused, its optical sensor whirring louder. The squad on the cliff halted, their weapons lowering fractionally, their synthesized voices now clearer, amplified. Subject identified as human designation, Rostova, Eva. Retrieval protocols initiated. Item in possession of subject, unknown. Eva met the drone's unblinking gaze. She puffed out her chest, affecting an air of immense importance she didn't feel. This, she announced, her voice hoarse but steady, using the few alien trade phrases she'd picked up from smugglers, chatter, a language barely intelligible but enough to convey intent. This is the key, she emphasized the word, making it sound ancient, mystical, deeply significant, to everything. The drone's whirring increased, its energy readings spiking as it tried to analyze the innocuous figurine. The alien squad exchanged what looked like confused glances. Dom key? Everything? Their probability models for dealing with a stranded, weaponless human did not include cryptic pronouncements and seemingly invaluable trinkets. They were designed for combat, for capture, for predictable outcomes. Not riddles. The key holds much power, Eva continued, improvising wildly, her eyes darting between the drone and the armored aliens. She could practically feel their processing cores struggling. Dangerous power, uncontrolled. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the salt-stung wind whip around her. You want it? You must negotiate. The metallic voices from the aliens escalated, a flurry of rapid, agitated queries. Query. What power? What negotiation? Probability of item being genuine artifact. Negligible. Eva just smiled, a wide, confident human grin that held absolutely no logic. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of alien sound washing over Jax. It vibrated in his teeth, rattled his bones, and pounded in his ears like 1,000 drums. Dust, thick and metallic smelling, choked the air of the massive open-air arena. He squinted through it, his eyes burning, fixed on his opponent. The Xylosian gladiator, a towering biped with 4 razor-sharp limbs, moved with a horrifying, almost serene grace. Every sweep of its bladed arms was a calculated arc, every step a precisely measured shift of weight. The aliens in the stands, with their multiple eyes and complex neural networks, loved this. They loved the predictability, the elegant lethality of a perfectly executed, pre-programmed fight sequence. They had run a million simulations for this exact matchup. The massive, skilled Xylosian versus the small, fragile human, Jax. And every simulation ended with Jax as a smear on the blood-soaked sand. Jax could feel the sweat trickling down his spine, cold against his skin, despite the baking heat of the twin suns. His palms were slick around the grip of his scavenged bludgeon, a heavy, dented pipe he'd found in the armory, hardly a match for the Xylosian's vibroblades. He was outmatched, out-armed, and, by all logical accounts, out of time. The Xylosian lunged, a blur of silver and muscle. Its primary blade sliced through the air where Jax had been a microsecond before, the wind of their passage stinging his cheek. Jax dove, rolling clumsily, kicking up a spray of crimson dust. The alien's secondary limbs, tipped with grappling claws, snatched at his retreating form, missing by inches. Predicted evasive maneuver, 2.7. Response successful. The arena announcer's flat, synthesized voice boomed, projecting into Jax's helmet. It was a running commentary, a detailed analysis of his imminent demise for the baying crowd. Probability of human incapacitation within next 5 rotations, 94.6%. Jax scoffed, a raw, primal sound escaping his throat. Probability models could kiss his ass. He didn't have a plan beyond don't get sliced. He scrambled to his feet, heart hammering against his ribs, tasting the acrid tang of adrenaline. His eyes darted around the arena, taking in the jagged rock formations, the shimmering heat haze, the impossible height of the spectator stands. The Xylosian advanced, its multi-jointed legs clicking softly on the sand, its optical sensors fixed on him. It was a hunter, patient and methodical, waiting for Jax to make a predictable mistake. But humans? Humans weren't predictable. He saw it then. Not a weakness in the Xylosian, but a potential in the arena itself. One of the massive support pillars, part of the ancient crumbling architecture, had a section of loose masonry near its base. Barely noticeable, unless you were looking for anything that wasn't part of the calculated fight. The Xylosian's combat programming would have deemed it an environmental static, irrelevant. The Xylosian closed the distance, its primary bladed arms sweeping in a devastating, pre-calculated double helix. Jax didn't think. He didn't plan. He didn't run a simulation. He felt it, a sudden, fierce surge of instinct, a defiant spark. Instead of dodging away from the Xylosian, he lunged towards it. A desperate, illogical sprint directly into the path of the whirling blades. The crowd roared, delighted by his apparent, suicidal idiocy. Even the Xylosian seemed to hesitate, its internal programming likely screaming about this unexpected, non-optimal approach. Jax didn't aim for the Xylosian. He aimed for the loose masonry, using his bludgeon not to strike an enemy, but to strike the ground right beside the crumbling pillar. A precise, jarring impact designed to dislodge, to destabilize. His judgment, forged in a split second of raw human desperation, was that chaos was his only ally. The clang of Jax's bludgeon against the loose masonry wasn't loud, not against the arena's roaring acoustics, but the sound it made was wrong. It wasn't a blow to flesh, nor a parry of metal. It was a thump crack, an unnatural rupture in the carefully controlled brutality of the gladiatorial games. The Xylosian, mid-lunge, stuttered. Its multi-jointed legs locked for a split second, optical sensors swiveling from Jax to the source of the noise. Their combat programming, their thousands of simulations, had no subroutine for an opponent actively destabilizing the arena architecture. Then, with a sickening groan, a shower of ancient dust-choked stone rained down from the pillar. Not a full collapse, not yet, but enough to create a choking, blinding cloud, a thick curtain of debris and grit. The metallic scent of battle was instantly overwhelmed by the sharp, earthy smell of pulverized rock. Jax didn't hesitate. He plunged into the dust, his bludgeon useless against the Xylosian's armored form. This wasn't about fighting, it was about exploiting the unexpected. He moved low, fast, a shadow in the newly formed chaos, relying on raw instinct rather than practiced maneuvers. He could hear the Xylosian's agitated clicks, its vibroblades now sweeping wildly, defensively, trying to pierce the opaque cloud. The creature was out of its element, its precision-based combat system struggling without clear targets, without predictable vectors. Environmental interference. Extreme. Opponent obscured. The arena announcer's voice crackled, laced with a rare note of what sounded like frustration. Probability of Xylosian target acquisition, decreasing. Probability of human survival, static. Jax thought, a grim smile twisting his lips as he ducked under a flailing blade. They still didn't get it. Static meant they couldn't calculate it. An asterisk not calculable, Konmistrak, was where humans thrived. He felt the rough surface of the pillar against his back, leaning into it, moving with the wall like a ghost. The dust was so thick he could taste it, feel it gritty between his teeth. He knew the Xylosian couldn't see him, but it could hear him. He could feel the ground vibrating as it stomped, trying to orient itself. He took a risk. He stomped his own foot. A single, sharp impact on the sand, then immediately shifted position. The Xylosian reacted, lunging towards the sound, its bladed limbs slicing through empty air. Jax repeated the trick, a rapid succession of feints, using the acoustics of the crumbling pillar to create false echoes, drawing the frustrated gladiator further into the dense dust cloud. Xylosian combat protocols, anomaly detected. Target location ambiguous. Probability of regaining optimal combat parameters, declining. The announcer's voice was now tinged with something almost like disbelief. The crowd, too, was quieter, its roar replaced by an uneasy murmuring. This wasn't the elegant, predictable dance they'd paid to see. This was messy. Human. Jax, gasping for breath, saw his chance. The Xylosian, disoriented, had positioned itself with its back to a newly formed narrow crevice in the pillar, a direct result of Jax's earlier, illogical strike. He didn't have a weapon, but he had momentum, and he had a body. He launched himself forward, not with a strike, but a desperate, low tackle. He slammed into the Xylosian's legs, not aiming to bring it down, but to push it, to shove it into the crevice. It was a move no trained gladiator would ever consider, a crude, undignified impact, relying purely on the physics of mass and surprise. The Xylosian shrieked, a metallic screech of protest as its multi-jointed leg, designed for elegant movement, got wedged, then snapped with a sickening crunch of ceramite. Its balance failed, and the towering warrior toppled, crashing to the sand, enveloped in the lingering dust. Jax rolled clear, his body screaming in protest, but a wild, triumphant laugh bubbled in his chest. The gritty taste of stone dust was as familiar to Kale as the taste of his morning brew. It coated his tongue, worked its way into the lines on his face, settled into the worn grooves of his hands. For 50 years he'd lived and breathed the ancient living rock of the sunken citadel. Now, that same dust churned in the air not from his chisel, but from the brutal, alien efficiency trying to tear his home apart. The hum was sickening. A low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the very bedrock, shaking loose fine particles from the colossal, hand-hewn blocks. On the other side of the massive outer wall, the alien siege engines were at work. Surgical, precise, their sonic drills targeting what their scans had calculated as stress fractures, points of structural weakness invisible to the naked eye. Kale knelt, his ear pressed to the cool, unyielding stone. He didn't need their fancy scans. He'd laid these stones, or helped his father lay them. He knew the temper of this rock, the ancient faults, the way the seismic activity from the nearby volcano had shifted the pressure over centuries. He knew where the asterisk's true weaknesses were, and they weren't where the aliens were focusing their perfectly calibrated attacks. "They think they're smart," Kale muttered, spitting a mouthful of grit. His voice was a rasp, hoarse from shouting orders and the constant dust. "Think they can just punch a hole wherever their little charts tell 'em?" A shudder ran through the wall, stronger this time. A fine crack, barely visible, appeared in the mortar between two enormous granite blocks, precisely where the aliens' probability models had indicated a high likelihood of structural failure. The aliens were winning. Slowly, methodically, they were dismantling generations of human craft. But Kale wasn't watching the new crack. He was looking at the section not above it, where a particularly stubborn vein of quartz ran through the granite, a spot the aliens' preliminary scans had likely dismissed as reinforced. A spot that Kale knew, with an old mason's gut instinct, was actually under immense internal tension, a ticking time bomb waiting for the right vibration. His hands, thick with calluses, moved with a practiced ease. He didn't have explosives, no advanced countermeasures. All he had was a heavy-duty stone hammer and a handful of steel shims, wedges he used for splitting blocks, not defending against alien invasion. "Sergeant Rian, they're still hitting Sector Gamma," a young, panicked voice crackled over the comms. "Their projections show breach in approximately 7 minutes." Kale grunted. 7 minutes. Enough time. He found a particularly deep seam in the quartz vein he'd been eyeing. It wasn't a weakness on the surface, but it was Thintiman Morse. He chose his shim, a thin, precisely tapered piece of hardened steel, and drove it into the seam with a sharp, controlled blow from his hammer. Clink. Clang. Not a hard hit. Just enough. He felt the subtle shift, the almost imperceptible groan of the rock. The alien hum intensified at the original breach point, a concentrated effort to finish their calculated assault. Kale ignored it. He tapped another shim into place, a fraction of an inch further along the vein. His strategy wasn't about countering their attack. It was about redirecting the very forces they were applying. It was about using the wall's own history against them. This wasn't in their probability models. This wasn't a calculated defense. This was an old man's faith in stone, and the unpredictable, stubborn ingenuity of a human who knew that sometimes the best way to fight a perfectly planned attack was to throw a wrench into the very foundations it relied upon. Kale wiped sweat and dust from his eyes, a fierce, defiant light in them. He just kept tapping. The ground beneath Kale's feet didn't just vibrate anymore, it shuddered. A low, guttural groan echoed from deep within the ancient stone, a sound like a giant awakening in agony. Fine particles of dust, whipped into a choking haze, filled the air, stinging his eyes and grating in his throat. The alien sonic drills outside were pounding harder, faster, a calculated crescendo designed to shatter the very will of the Citadel. "Breach in Sector Gamma. Projected 1 minute." Sergeant Rian's voice screamed over the comms, raw with panic. "The energy readings are critical. They're going to blow through." Kale ignored the static in his ear, his focus absolute. He'd laid his last steel shim into the stubborn quartz vein, his calloused fingers feeling the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the rock's tension. He wasn't aiming for a breach. He was aiming for a sheer direction. He knew this stone like his own skin. Knew its faults, its strengths, its strange internal geometry. The aliens thought they understood stress points from their scans. Kale understood it from 50 years of hands-on, trial-and-error work. He took a deep breath, the taste of dry stone and old iron filling his mouth, and then, with a methodical rhythm, he began to tap. Not hard blows, not violent strikes, just persistent, resonant taps with his hammer, following the line of the shims. A craftsman's prayer translated into percussive force. Clink, 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 clang. It was a quiet, insistent rhythm against the monstrous thrum of the alien drills. A symphony of a single hammer against 1,000 alien calculations. The wall groaned again, not from the aliens' targeted impact, but from somewhere else. A deeper, more fundamental protest. Kale grinned, a wide, dust-streaked slash of triumph on his grizzled face. "Come on, old friend," he muttered to the stone. "Show 'em what real strength looks like." From outside, the alien comms, faintly audible through the thick walls, erupted in a flurry of agitated clicks and whistles. "Anomaly detected. Energy resonance shifting. Predicted breach vector. Destabilized." Their perfectly calibrated assault was suddenly hitting something entirely unexpected. Their simulations hadn't accounted for an old human mason manually altering the fundamental structural dynamics of a geological formation. Then, with a deafening crack that seemed to rip the air itself, the massive wall buckled. Not where the alien drills had been pounding, not the neat, calculated breach they'd spent hours engineering. Instead, a colossal section of stone, several meters above their target, along the very quartz vein Cale had been tampering with, tore free. It wasn't an explosion, but a sudden, violent separation, like a living thing finally giving up a long-held secret. The force of the collapse was immense. A tidal wave of dust, pulverized rock, and debris slammed inwards, throwing Cale backward. He hit the ground hard, his head ringing, the taste of blood mixing with the stone dust. But even through the haze of pain he saw it. A gaping, jagged maw in the wall, not a neat, controlled breach, but a catastrophic failure. And through that sudden, unexpected hole, he saw something else. The chaotic scramble of alien siege engines, caught completely off guard, retreating in disarray from a breach they hadn't anticipated, couldn't control. Their precision attack had met the brute, unpredictable force of human ingenuity and lost. Cale pushed himself up, his body aching, his ears ringing, but a fierce, triumphant light in his eyes. He hadn't followed a blueprint. He'd followed his gut, a lifetime of touching and shaping stone. For humans, the most effective blueprint was often forged in the moment, from trial, from error, and from the stubborn, beautiful refusal to play by anyone else's calculated rules. The coarse feel of the borrowed cloak scratched against Lena's skin, a constant, irritating reminder of her precarious masquerade. It smelled faintly of something acrid, something vaguely chitinous, and not at all human. Every nerve ending in her body screamed for her to shed the itchy fabric, to run, to breathe air that didn't taste of ozone and alien fear. But she pressed on, one slow, deliberate step after another, deeper into the sterile, humming corridor of the Xilian processing hub. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her mission, a covert recon of a downed transport, had gone sideways 3 rotations ago. Now she was behind enemy lines, wearing the tattered robe of a low-caste Xylian courier, relying on a vague memory of their shuffling gait and the almost convincing vocal modulator clutched in her sweaty palm. It was all a bluff, a desperate gamble with her life as the ante. Ahead, the checkpoint loomed. 2 towering Xylian guards, all sharp angles and multi-jointed limbs, stood sentinel. Their optical sensors, a quartet of unblinking red lights, swept the approaching crowd with chilling efficiency. Above them, a massive archway pulsed with faint energy, the telltale sign of a full-spectrum bioscanner. Their probability models were undoubtedly calculating every approaching being's compliance, their species, their intent. They were designed to detect the slightest anomaly. A human, disguised as a Xylian courier, was an anomaly of the highest order. Lena felt the familiar cold dread coil in her gut, but a flicker of defiance sparked in her eyes. She adjusted the cloak, trying to mimic the slumped posture of a weary courier, letting her shoulders sag. Her legs ached, every muscle tense, ready to bolt. But her face remained impassive beneath the hood, a mask of feigned indifference. As she shuffled closer, she could hear the soft whir of the scanner intensifying, the air around her growing heavy with static. It was analyzing her, comparing her biological signature, her movements, her very presence, against known Xylian profiles. She felt a phantom itch on her inner arm, where her human biometric data would be screaming at their sensors. Identity verification. Present credentials. One of the guards rasped, its voice a grating chorus of clicks and growls. It extended a 3-fingered manipulator, its clawed digits perfectly still. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't have credentials. Not real ones. She'd found a discarded data slate, blank, but she knew just enough to make it look like it was transmitting. She held it out, her hand trembling ever so slightly, a tremor she hoped they'd attribute to Xylian fatigue, not human terror. She activated the vocal modulator. Priority delivery, Sector 7. She rasped, mimicking the Xylian click-speak she'd painstakingly learned. It wasn't perfect. It was a terrible imitation. She knew it. But it was rope-pinch fast. Faster than their probability models could process. The guard's red optical sensors narrowed, focusing intently on the blank data slate. A low, querying rumble came from its chest cavity. Sector 7, no such priority assigned to Courier Unit 7, GAMMA9. Probability of false identification, high. Lena knew this was it. Her bluff was called. But she didn't break. She didn't flee. Instead, a wild, reckless surge of human wit took over. She leaned in conspiratorially, lowering her voice, deepening the gravelly modulated tone. This delivery, it's asterisk unlisted, she hissed, infusing the word with a conspiratorial weight that implied secrets, forbidden knowledge, something beyond protocol. You want to interrupt an unlisted priority. For Wei, the guard paused. Its optical sensors flickered, then rotated towards its companion. But unlisted priority? For Wei, those were not parameters in its standard protocols. Its probability models likely went into overload, unable to account for the sudden, illogical implication of a hidden, higher authority. The coarse cloak still chafed, but Lena ignored it, the phantom itch on her arm a more pressing concern. With every rhythmic thrum of the Xylian processing hub, she could almost feel their pervasive sensors analyzing the air, scanning for anything amiss. She'd bluffed her way past the gate, yes, but that was just the appetizer. The main course was navigating this sterile alien labyrinth to find her downed transport, and, by extension, a way out. Corridors stretched endlessly, gleaming with an unnerving, polished chrome. The air itself tasted of recycled ozone and something faintly metallic, a flavor of pure, unadulterated efficiency. No dust motes danced in the air, no stray scuff marks marred the floors. It was a place designed for perfect, calculated operation, utterly alien to the messy, chaotic world Lena knew. Every turn, every junction, presented a new challenge, a choice between equally logical, equally dangerous paths. Her mission brief had provided no blueprints for a deep cover infiltration. She was flying blind, running on intuition and the adrenaline coursing through her veins. A trio of Xylian workers, shorter and squatter than the guards, scurried past her, their multiple limbs moving in perfectly synchronized patterns. They carried glowing data slates, their heads down, seemingly oblivious. Lena kept her pace, a slow, weary shuffle, her head slightly bowed, a silent prayer that her borrowed gait was convincing enough. She felt their optical sensors sweep over her, a faint tingle on her skin, but they moved on, their internal programming clearly deciding she fit the harmless courier probability. She reached a massive junction, a hub of intersecting corridors, each leading to a different sector. A holographic map shimmered above a central console, but its alien script was a dizzying blur of incomprehensible symbols. Her comm unit, a tiny concealed piece of human tech, was silent. No data, no guidance. The Xylians, with their probability models, would analyze every variable, calculate the optimal path. Lena had a different method. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, letting the ambient hum of the facility wash over her, listening for anything that felt collis-guarded. Her mind drifted, a brief, desperate murmur of memory. She thought of her haphazard apartment back on Earth, the stack of unread books, the mismatched mugs in the cupboard, the way her life had just happened. Not planned, not plotted, but a series of small, spontaneous decisions, leading to an entirely unexpected, yet deeply felt, reality. It was a life built by chance, by the messy, unpredictable flow of human existence, and in this moment that felt like a superpower. She opened her eyes and pointed a finger at a random corridor, one that seemed subtly less trafficked, less brightly lit. No logic. No reason. Just a gut feeling. A human whisper in the sterile silence. She took a breath that tasted of fear and grim determination, then shuffled down it. The corridor led to a service shaft, its entrance barely discernible behind a utility panel. Not a main thoroughfare, not a path any Xylian would logically choose for a courier delivery. Her heart leaped. This was it. This was the kind of illogical, unplanned detour that screamed, not allayed. Tot mes human. She pried the panel open, the faint screech of protesting metal echoing loudly in the narrow space. Inside, the shaft was dark, cramped, smelling of stale air and something oily. A human-sized crawlspace, leading downwards. She knew her transport, if it was indeed salvageable, would be in a lower sublevel, a less critical area. This was a wild guess. A shot in the dark. She squeezed into the shaft, pulling the panel closed behind her. The darkness was absolute, save for the faint glow of her comm unit. She tasted the metallic tang of fear, but also something else, a fierce, defiant spark. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she was going to find out.